with weapons that can fire bullets faster than the speed of sound, shoot underwater, and autonomously target enemies with AI. It's time to lock and load as we march through the evolution of military firepower technology. When searching through the Be-Amazed arsenal, there's no better place to start than the mother of all machine guns, the M2 Browning. Not only is it one of the world's longest-serving guns, it's also something of an A-lister, with appearances in movies like Rambo and G.I. Joe. It was first designed near the end of World War I before coming into military service in 1933. Over 90 years later, this OAP is featured in almost every major conflict across the last century, including World War II, Vietnam, and the war in Ukraine. The Browning is a heavy machine gun, which means it's too large to be carried by a single soldier and is designed to be used on a stationary mount. Heavy MGs are almost as relentless as your mom nagging you to get a haircut. But why is the Browning so special? Well, its longevity can be chalked up to the fact that it's extremely reliable. And like every good movie star, it knows how to adapt. Though the frame has largely stayed the same, the Browning has multiple variants that can be used by ground troops, armored vehicles, aircraft, and ships. Take this navalized twin version, which features two Brownings on one mount. Some soldiers have even used the Browning as a sniper rifle due to its power, and in 1967 the Marine Carlos Hatchcock hit a target from 2,500 yards away, setting a sniping record which stood until 2002. The M2 is affectionately nicknamed Ma Deuce, but the weapon's biggest downside is that it's massive, weighing in at over 80 pounds. This limits mobility, but it allows it to stay stable while shooting 50 caliber cartridges that are 5.4 inches long at targets up to 7,400 yards away. So you definitely wouldn't want to be caught on the wrong end of this thing. And if it was pointed at me, I'd definitely drop a Ma Deuce in my pants. But I'd still rather take my chances against a Browning than face the M134 minigun. Despite its name, there's nothing mini about this monster. In fact, it has one of the highest fire rates of any gun on Earth, with the ability to fire rounds at 2,800 feet per second. This lets it turn anything downrange into Swiss cheese. And the secret behind its speed lies in its 6 individual barrels. See, despite being designed in the 1960s, the M134 is based on a gun from the 1860s called the Gatling gun. The Gatling had 6 to 10 barrels that spun around, and as each one rotated, they would load a cartridge, fire the bullet, then eject the empty casing at designated spots in the spin. The empty barrel would then cool until it was rotated back to its original position and automatically loaded with a new bullet. This process could be repeated 10 times in one rotation, which would allow the gun to shoot without its barrels overheating. The original Gatling was fired with a hand crank, which was exhausting for the soldier. But a century later, an American manufacturer decided to return to the idea by rotating the barrels with an electric motor, creating a weapon that operates like the Gatling gun, but at much greater speeds. With this, the minigun was born, and the Gatling's big bad grandson has been used in service ever since it was introduced in 1963. Its motor needs a power source, and it fires so quickly that it needs to be placed on platforms capable of carrying an insane amount of ammo. So soldiers don't carry the gun around, and it's commonly found on trucks, ships, and helicopters that rain holy terror down from the skies. But what about a weapon that's 4 times as powerful? This fearsome foe is the M134D, and it was fired in 2022 at the annual Big Sandy shooting event in Arizona. This weapon is as powerful as 4 miniguns, and it's such a whopper that you're not going to find this in your local Walmart. But even if you could, you probably wouldn't want to try it out, because firing the quad minigun for a minute will cost you $9,000 in ammunition.
That's a lot of damage.
But let's get back to weapons that are currently being used in combat, like the U.S. Navy's Mark 38 machine gun system. The Mark 38 has been raining hellfire since 1986, and unlike other guns that are used against personnel, it's designed for bigger targets like armored boats. See, it's a weapon system made for battleships that uses the Mark 242 Bushmaster mounted on a computer-controlled rotating turret. The whole Mark 38 system weighs just under 2,500 pounds, roughly as much as a car. Its ammo weighs 1 pound, so no matter what they tell you, size does matter. And these giant shells are expelled at speeds of over 4,000 feet per second, and they can travel for 7,400 yards. For context, that's further than the height of North America's tallest mountain, Mount Denali. The Mega Mark could let you take out enemies at the top of a mountain, and modern versions can now be operated with a remote control, allowing the gun to be fired from the safety of a control room during an attack. This makes firing the gun feel like you're playing Call of Duty. But all variants of the Mark 38 are so massive that they need 2 people to load the ammunition, conduct maintenance, and replace the Bushmaster if it malfunctions. So they're a bit more technical to use than your Xbox controller. The Mark 38 is a bit of a diva, but this next weapon doesn't need any help in combat, as it can target enemies and bring them down all by itself. In recent years, modern warfare has started to see the use of small drones that can spy on the enemy and conduct air attacks. So the US military has decided to fight fire with autonomous fire, by using artificially intelligent machine guns to mow them down. In 2024, a robotics company created the Bullfrog. And while its namesake isn't particularly formidable, this weapon system is no croaking matter. The Bullfrog is comprised of an M240 machine gun which is mounted on a rotating turret, and outfitted with AI sensors and computer vision software that can spot and fire at drones autonomously with much greater speed and accuracy than a soldier. It's so effective that it can hit a drone the size of a human hand from 200 yards away with a single shot. For comparison, that's like dropping a coin into a mail slot from the top of the Statue of Liberty. Now, the Bullfrog targets enemies itself, but it doesn't fire until commanded to by a human operator. However, this is just an optional safety feature, and it's fully capable of working completely independently, which isn't freaky at all. Thankfully, the Bullfrog is still only a prototype, but in 2024 it was demonstrated to the US Department of Defense and the Pentagon. As of March 2025, Allen Control Systems has raised over $30 million to produce the weapon and finish up its development, so it seems this tadpole is ready to become a frog, and it'll see use on the battlefield soon. The Bullfrog brings us one step closer to AI overthrowing humanity, and I'm sure its technology will be used by ChatGPT to create a platoon of robot soldiers with guns mounted on their shoulders. Yet another autonomous drone destroyer is the Skynex Air Defense System. The Skynex is outfitted with various radar and sensor units like the Bullfrog, meaning it can accurately locate targets and fire at them with 35mm caliber shells. The same company who produced the Skynex also produces the Mauser BK-27. It's a revolver cannon that can fire shells nearly 6 inches long at speeds of up to 3,600 feet per second. The Mauser can also take down ships and tanks. Now let's check out the original shoulder-mounted machine gun that was built in Australia all the way back in 1942. See, during World War II, the Australian Air Force found that their 50 caliber machine guns were too big to fit in their planes' weapon bays and would break the old-school weapon mounts with their powerful recoil. So one gun magician called Russ Robinson stepped up to the plate to have a swing at the issue. He created a gun called the SR6 that was smaller, lighter, and had much less recoil than a standard gun due to a large spring that absorbed kickback while firing. This is now known as a constant recoil system, and the weapon's recoil was equivalent to a .303 caliber rifle, even though Russ's gun fired with 6 times the amount of power. It's also weighed just 47 pounds, significantly less than a standard Browning's 80. But incredibly, one version called the Model 14 was also designed to be fired by foot soldiers,
with a rocket launcher-style shoulder mount.
Russ's hope was that if the Australian military saw that this gun was capable of being fired in this way, it would show up how much its weight and recoil had been reduced, convincing them to adopt it for their planes. However, when World War II ended 3 years later, the funding given to arms development was reduced, so this shoulder shooter never saw mainstream production. Today, other guns have used Robinson's constant recoil system, but only a few pictures of his original weapon even exist, and the only model is kept at the National Firearms Centre in England. Plus, as ingenious as the design seems, firing a .50 caliber round right next to your ear seems like a great way to permanently lose your hearing. And deafening all your soldiers during a gunfight is hardly a good battle strategy. After all, there's lots to listen out for during a skirmish, like orders from your squad leader, fellow soldiers calling for help, and the roar of a Gatling on the world's most terrifying gunship. The Gatling gun didn't just inspire the M134, and the minigun's bigger brother is the M61 Vulcan. This monstrous electric Gatling has been used by America's military since 1959,
But unlike the M134, the Vulcan is an autocannon that fires 6-inch long 20mm shells.
it's essentially a minigun on steroids and a variant made for planes. The Vulcan M6A12 has been the principal cannon used by the U.S. Air Force for over 60 years, and it even features on the Air Force's most powerful plane, the AC-130. But the Vulcan isn't only fired in the sky, and it's also found aboard most of the U.S. Navy's destroyers and ships from 23 other nations in the Phalanx Close-In Weapons System. Close-In Weapons Systems, or CWIS, are used aboard ships as the last line of defense against missiles, enemy boats, and aircraft. The Phalanx can automatically spot threats up to 10,000 yards away using radar antenna before an AI-powered computer determines whether the target is a friend or a foe.
Now,
Then, as you can imagine, the Vulcan will have no trouble neutralizing the threat. But it isn't the only Gatling-inspired weapon to reach CWIS status, and it's a baby compared to the GAU-8 Avenger. This weapon was developed in the 70s, and it's a multi-barreled autocannon that's more than twice the size of the Vulcan and can do this. With 7 barrels, the GAU-8 is bigger than a car, weighing in at a whopping 620 pounds. It's most famous for being the gun aboard the A-10 Thunderbolt, a plane so fearsome that it's been nicknamed the Warthog. Ain't he cute? It's the only American close air support plane in use, which means it supports ground troops by directly attacking enemy vehicles and soldiers below. And when the Avenger fires, it definitely sounds like thunder, or a fart from an angry god. And hearing that roar while out on the battlefield must be terrifying. But the Avenger has also starred at sea in a Dutch close-in weapons system called the Goalkeeper. It's used to protect the Netherlands ships, and it's totally autonomous, locking onto incoming missiles, boats, and jets with the press of a button. I wouldn't want to try and score a goal against this keeper, as its giant munitions essentially create a wall of gunfire to take out the enemy before they reach the ship. But if the Avenger shells can do that to armed vehicles, I'm not even gonna think what they could do to a person when fired by the Warthog. Now let's head back in time to the Cold War and move from America's finest weaponry to the biggest, baddest gun created by the Soviet Union. You've probably heard of the AK-47, but this flimsy assault rifle is nothing compared to the AK-630. This AK is a 6-barrel autocannon from 1963 that's the Soviet take on the Gatling. It's primarily used as a naval cannon on a range of close-in weapon systems called Vempel that predates the Phalanx and Goalkeeper by around 20 years. Like other Sea Whizzes, the Vempel is mounted on ships and it's able to automatically detect enemy torpedoes up to 82,000 yards away. That's almost 10 times the height of Mount Everest. This thing can probably see into the future too. But in 1983, a modified version called the 630 M12 was created that uses 2 blocks of 6 barrels of Sea Whiz to dual-wield Gatling guns, and this version was tested throughout the late 80s. But it ultimately wasn't put into production due to the concurrent development of the 3M87 Cortex Sea Whiz, which had a greater firing range. So today, the 630 M12 is pretty obscure and it's only used on the Russian R-44 missile boat. It's like seeing a rare Pokemon out in the wild. More recently, militaries have experimented with placing the 630 on the back of trucks to use its insane firepower out on the battlefield. But do you know what? I'm sick of these autocannons overshadowing genuine machine guns. So let's move on to one of the undisputed heaviest weapons in the weapon world, the GAU-19 minigun. This wonder weapon was developed in the 80s and it clocks in at a whopping 138 pounds. Plus, while it's mostly used on vehicles like Humvees and helicopters, it can also be fired by a single soldier on the battlefield with a transportable turret. It's able to fire up to 2,000 rounds per minute, which is insane for a 50 caliber weapon. But this insane power doesn't come cheap, as the military has to pay $22,000 per unit, which is about $3 grand more expensive than the M134. This price tag combined with the gun's weight means it isn't used as much as the M134, but it has been exported to several other nations like Colombia and Mexico, and the gun is so heavy that you don't even need to reload it after you've run out of bullets. Just push it out your helicopter and it should do just as much damage to the enemy below. The GAU-19's lack of popularity is pretty disappointing, but other giant machine guns have been dragged onto the battlefield and become incredibly successful. On the other side of the Iron Curtain is the KPV machine gun, a Soviet weapon created way back in 1949. The weapon was designed to be a gun with the power of a semi-automatic anti-tank rifle. The KPV had many variants, like the infantry PKP that had to be dragged around the battlefield by soldiers on a wheeled support. The support and gun weighed a combined 370 pounds, so it wasn't very practical, and production stopped in 1967. But the KPV lived on through its KPV-T variant, which has a heavier barrel and a shorter receiver so it can be fixed to vehicles. This is still used on several fighting vehicles, boats, and the ZPU series of anti-aircraft mounts. They can hold up to 4 KPVs that will fill the sky with a combined 2,600 anti-tank rounds per minute. This power makes it one of the most deployed guns in its super heavyweight category, as it's used in over 50 countries worldwide. Not bad for a chunker, hey? And check out the ZPU in action. If this was a popularity contest, then the KPV is definitely on the podium, but this next weapon is the homecoming queen of the machine gun bomb.
The FN Mag is largely regarded as one of the most successful and widely used weapons of all time,
having been adopted by more than 90 countries and serving in nearly every conflict since it was designed in 1958. It's a Belgian light machine gun, which means it's designed to be used by a single soldier out in the field. At just 26 pounds, it can be fired standing up, and its bipod allows it to be set up like a makeshift turret when the soldier is lying down. It's also gained a reputation for being one of the most reliable guns of all time, allowing it to be used in all conditions, from dusty deserts to humid jungles. The only downside is that for a lightweight machine gun, 26 pounds is actually pretty heavy. But the FN Mag is so powerful it's also regularly used as a vehicle-mounted weapon too. Furthermore, some variants like the American M240L have managed to cut the weight down by over 5 pounds by making it out of lighter materials like titanium instead of steel. See what I mean? Versatile. But no machine gun knows more about adaptability than the Stoner 63. Unlike other guns which are made to serve specific roles, the Stoner had a clever design that meant its components could be swapped out to build 15 different guns around the same frame. Created by arms designer Eugene Stoner in, you guessed it, 1963, this machine's configurations included multiple different gun iterations. This adaptability essentially allowed the gun to be used in all battle situations, as the user could customize it to their liking, like playing dress-up, but for battle-hardened soldiers.
The Stoner even saw some use during the Vietnam War.
But ultimately, the U.S. Army feared that its complex interchangeable parts wouldn't withstand the rugged conditions in Vietnam's jungles, so sadly only 4,000 were ever produced. Still, they became a favorite amongst Navy SEALs for special operations, and the Stoner 63 is still popular today as a rare collector's item. Eugene Stoner also created the M16, which is one of the most famous and mass-produced guns of all time. But the 63 definitely sounds like something a Stoner would create. Like, what if one gun could, be every gun, man? Still, this isn't the craziest idea that an arms designer has come up with. The corner shot is a weapon that allows the user to shoot around corners by bending up to 60 degrees left or right. They've even been featured in some blockbuster movies. You'd think this creative invention would revolutionize warfare, but unfortunately the corner shot has a few creases to iron out. The system weighs over 8 pounds and each unit costs $12,000. This is just too expensive to be used en masse by the military, so it's only seen limited use by specialized police units. But once it's able to round those corners and lower the price, it could totally innovate the world of weapon development. I know I could do with one. Not for warfare, but to make sure nobody's in the kitchen so I can steal the last cookie. The corner shot shows that sometimes high-tech equipment is just too complicated to be effective in battle, and it's often better to go with something more old school, like the DSHK. Nicknamed Dushka or Sweetheart, this Soviet gun came before the KPV, entering service in 1939. The 74-pound beast was designed to be used against low-flying aircraft like a Soviet take on the M2 Browning, and entering service right before World War II, the Dushka didn't see much use initially, as it was only really used as an AA gun. But after the Allies won, it became the standard heavyweight machine gun on the USSR's armored vehicles. The Soviets actually replaced it with the much lighter 55-pound NSV in 1971, but today the Dushka is still used around the world by former Soviet countries, as well as paramilitaries, insurgency groups, and warlords. See, there's a ton of Dushkas from the Cold War lying around. Its old age means it's very cheap, and its hardy design makes it incredibly reliable. So the Sweetheart has become something of a bad boy, and you're more likely to see it strapped on some dude's Toyota than an armored military vehicle. Now, Russia might have invented one of the most impressive automatic guns ever with their ADS amphibious rifle. It sounds like something out of a movie, but this wet weapon was introduced into service in 2013, and it's used by Russia's Special Forces unit of frogmen who carry out covert missions underwater. On dry land, the ADS can use a standard 5.45mm cartridge, just like the original AK-47, but the ammunition's 550-yard range is cut down to just 3 yards when fired underwater. So the ADS can also use amphibious super cavitating ammunition that creates a bubble around itself as it's fired. This is created by the bullet's flat tip and sharp edge that disrupts the water and creates an air bubble big enough for it to move through. Furthermore, while they use the same casing as standard 5.45 cartridges, the actual bullets are much longer, giving them better stability in the water. Then, when they're fired, the empty cartridges are discarded forwards and away from the shooter, which prevents bubbles from blocking their view. All this stretches the gun's underwater range to 65 feet, which is slightly longer than a bowling lane. Admittedly, this still isn't much to write home about, but it's more than enough range for a frogman to swim up behind the enemy and attack them when they go for a dip in the pool. Still, the ADS isn't the most unique rifle out there. Just take a look at this thing. It might look like a gun from Halo, but this is actually a prototype of a laser rifle called the PHASR, which stands for Personnel Halting and Stimulation Response. Now, before you get excited about owning your own blaster from Star Wars, you should know that this weapon isn't fully automatic, it's non-lethal, and it's meant to temporarily blind enemies without causing permanent harm. It was developed by the U.S. Department of Defense in 2005 and designed to dazzle the target by shining a powerful laser in their eyes. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates since it was first revealed, which means it likely never went into production. So it seems like it will just remain a cool-looking prototype. Though in terms of rate of fire, it's better than any machine gun as it fires continuously and will never run out of ammo. It is less deadly, but maybe the next step in gun development is combining it with the other weapons we've seen today to create one light machine gun to end all light machine guns, the laser-powered Gatling. Well, back in the 90s, the Australian inventor Mike O'Dwyer had a similar thought and started to create prototypes of what promised to be the most powerful machine gun in history, the Metal Storm. Now that might look more like a cannon than a machine gun, but you just watch that weapon automatically fire 180 rounds in a fraction of a second. See, in traditional machine guns, each barrel can only hold one bullet at a time, as the force of one cartridge firing essentially loads the next round. In contrast, Mike's Metal Storm has a superposed load, which means each of the 36 barrels are capable of holding 15 rounds at a time, lined up neatly in a row. Almost every gun uses a firing pin to mechanically strike its cartridges, igniting gunpowder inside them, which fires the bullets with a small explosion. But this mechanical process limits the fire rate due to its reliance on moving parts, so the Metal Storm uses electrical wires to precisely ignite each round's gunpowder instead, firing them in order at incredible speed. All this is controlled by a computer, so the fire rate can be selected by the user with a maximum speed of 540 bullets in a fraction of a second. This rate of fire could be sustained for a long period of time that would equate to around 1 million rounds per minute or 16,600 rounds per second. Forget Swiss cheese, an entire army would dissolve into mist standing in front of this thing. If this tech is so good, why isn't it used by the military? Well, it turns out superposed loads come with a super load of problems, like how difficult the system is to reload. Fully loaded Metal Storm can fire all its bullets in less than a second, but then each barrel needs to be manually reloaded with 15 rounds, which takes a long time and is incredibly impractical on the battlefield. After the gun was demonstrated to the American government in 2001, the Navy declared they would purchase it in 2007. But O'Dwyer never figured out how to fix the reloading issue, and in 2012 his company went bankrupt and development on the Metal Storm ended. Still, Mike's idea lives on, as 10 years later in 2025, a very similar weapon started being developed by the Chinese government. This is a gigantic superposed machine gun attached to armored vehicles, which is theoretically capable of firing over 2 million rounds per minute. Furthermore, its electronic firing system can supposedly fire bullets 7 times faster than the speed of sound, which would allow the gun to intercept missiles. Now, before you start freaking out and preparing for China to take over the world, they've run into the same problem that Mike did with Metal Storm. How the heck do you reload 2 million bullets once you fired them? For the Chinese gun, they've made the weapon out of disposable barrels preloaded with bullets, so after it's fired, the barrels are all discarded and new ones are fitted on. However, having to climb onto the vehicle and rebuild the gun every time you want to fire isn't very practical, and the weapon has a long way to go before it's ready for battle. It looks like a Metal Storm style gun might never be practical for military use, but it does look awesome. And Mike's weapon served as inspiration for a fictional gun called the Vaporizer in a 2007 episode of CSI Miami. Hilariously, over the years, the fake Vaporizer has become the face of Metal Storm, and most Google searches will feed you images of the fictional gun. I'd be pretty peeved if a knockoff of my invention became more famous than the real thing. But hey, even if Metal Storm never sees the battlefield, at least its legacy lives on in the world of TV. Well, I'm officially out of ammo. Which machine gun did you find the most impressive? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you still have an itch for combat, check out my video on the most powerful military weapons of all time. See you in the next one.